So as the foundation for projecting our figure into linear perspective and into space, we're going to use the familiar concepts from linear perspective in basic drawing classes, such as converging lines and vanishing points and the horizon line. Just some key things to refresh. The converging lines are always run parallel to the horizontal edges of an otherwise 90-degree box. So as you can see here with accentuated lines in our foreshortened box, these are just horizontal edges viewed at an angle. One last thing that we should remember when we applying linear perspective concepts to figure is that the view angle is unique to that individual form. In this case, it's a box, and also unique to your view angle from which that form is viewed, or camera angle. So we'll use that and see how it applies to the flat diagram, which is what Andrew Loomis uses in his book Drawing Figure for all it's worth. And you guessed it, 8 measurements would be based on the width of the head. So it's basically a symmetrical little strip of paper with the head fitting in the top square, and it's centered against the symmetry line, the vertical axis line. So the chin just goes in that top square. Then we have 3 squares down, we have the navel, and slowly breaking down quickly some of the landmarks in the body. This is obviously a dummy view of a quote-unquote ideal male figure. So the clavicle is going to be just a smidge below the chin, about a third down that second square. Nipples are about second square down from the top. Kneecaps, very important here, is that the bottom of the kneecap rests on that second square from the bottom of the paper strip or the flat diagram. And if you think about the kneecap from the previous section of the course where we talked about mannequinizing the kneecap and using center lines to visualize the rotation, in this case, it's not the center of the kneecap that he aligns to the second square on the paper strip, but it's the bottom of the kneecap that rests on that. That's the most generalized version of it. The crotch is going to be right in the middle of our paper strip on the fourth square, and that basically breaks down most of the landmarks in a straight up standing figure quite nicely. Then we can add our hands that are just a smidge below the crotch line, and they don't quite extend towards the third square from the bottom, but they approaching about 2/3 in. And then elbows are rested at the level of belly button or the navel, and then we just fill in the rest. Specifically, the heel in the bottom of the flat diagram, which is notice is foreshortened at the frontal view of the figure. It's not extended down because there's quite a bit of length to the foot itself. We're ignoring that for right now because we're pretending to view it from the perfect frontal view. Naturally, the next step for us is to take this flat diagram and project it into space using linear perspective. So for starters, we're just utilizing 1-point linear perspective on this hypothetical horizon line from this very hypothetical view angle. These diagonals are helping us to find the foreshortening of each consecutive square since things are receding into the distance. Otherwise, we would be basically assuming how much shorter each of the consecutive square gets. So we're using diagonals that cut across through the center, and those diagonals need to remain parallel to each other in order to maintain the actual foreshortening and the accuracy of shrinking of individual squares. Here I'm just kind of dropping the opacity digitally, and now we are going to try and use the flat diagram and position it with head facing upward, aka receding into the distance in the first foreshortened paper strip, and then vice versa with the head facing towards us, feet facing away from us in the second. So while we're relying on our flat diagram for reference, we're going to use our best judgment to project this flat diagram. We're not actually extruding or filling in the volumes, we're just doing a flat diagram, and we're trying to project using our best judgment, relying on the flat diagram paper strip where main landmarks are, and we're foreshortening that flat figure. And you can kind of see how I was a little bit off with my actually that's probably if you can notice, the hands should extend further down towards the knee based on the flat diagram. So here's another quick example of how a paper strip or flat diagram can be useful to try and visualize even some more of a bent positioning or different poses. Again, utilizing main landmarks, the middle, the knee, the nipple, at the chest level, and the head. Here, as an exercise, we're just trying to use the underline sketch and actually try and visualize the mannequinized form that is now going to be a bit more filled in and a little bit more three-dimensional. That would be sort of extruded, to use a 3D modeling lingo, out of the flat diagram that we've previously sketched out. The next step in this exercise is to see how we can project these figures and maintain their relative proportions within different linear perspectives. So we're just dropping a basic grid with horizon line in the middle of your sketchbook paper and dropping our paper strip here. I'm actually struggling with my diagonals to find the perfect foreshortening, and you can see that what the mistake was that the diagonals don't go through the center of each consecutive square, and this is where it fell apart for me. So just a word of caution to use the diagonals that would be parallel to each other going through the center of each of the consecutive squares. So here I'm just dropping my flat diagram first in this foreshortened view. In the meantime, remembering what we've covered in the previous section about mannequinization and using cylinders and boxes, and really thinking about what the eye level is, meaning horizon line, and how that form foreshortens either downward or upward away from our eye level or camera angle. That is very much relative to that specific positioning of the form we're looking at, and your unique cone of vision or the view angle. Here I'm just kind of showing how this could change. Obviously, the only thing that it doesn't showcase with my skewing of the perspective is that the figure would be bigger towards us. And the last step for the exercise is just to try and again fill in, using the flat diagram, fill in a mannequin using kind of boxy shapes and cylindrical shapes, using the center lines or the cross contours that establish the symmetry. Here I'm again referring to the extrusion 3D modeling lingo, where a plane can be pulled out of a flat polygon of a three-dimensional form, digital three-dimensional form. And that is kind of the thinking that I utilize when I start to project my mannequin within the linear perspective I'm designing, and filling in changing my view angles. Obviously, feet are no longer flat, they're going to protrude outward. And that's basically all there is to the flat diagram and how it's utilized in a linear perspective. There is a supplemental PDF file that's linked up in your content that you are encouraged to save and use to further learn these concepts. Feel free to use it for your sketchbook exercises, save it on your computer or your Google Drive, and thank you for your attention.